Hello, this is Bill. I'm very excited to share with you another basic aspect in our elementary school. This episode of Hand Engraving Design Simplified is number 3 of Learning to See. This is Knowing Lines. Here, we will learn the many fundamental characteristics of straight lines, arcs, curves, and the beauty line. We'll begin with straight lines. Straight lines are really important in our hand engraving, such as on this revolver border here. Here we see a single straight line. We notice 2 dots, one at each end. And what we have done is ask our straight line to start and stop at these 2 points. If we only see 2 dots, our eyes naturally want to connect them with a straight line. The EFV we receive from the dots is pleasing to our eye. Interestingly, when we see a straight line, it may not be continuous but broken. But this broken line is still pleasing. We perceive it as a straight line until we get very close to it. Also, just because we see 2 points doesn't always mean that there will be a straight line between them. There may be an unpleasing line between them, such as this one. A straight line, though, has more pleasure for us. It's not as hectic. As a side point, your eye can bisect a line quite accurately. Practice it and learn to trust your eye. Let's move now from the straight line to the arc. 2 dots can also make an arc. We do not see it as readily as a straight line. However, we can train our eye to see it. The EFV from the 3rd dot in the center makes it easier to see the arc. We must be careful, though, if we think 3 dots will always make an arc. It could mean 2 straight lines, or even something really weird. Our eye naturally wants to connect the dots, like here with one long straight line, or a straight line between each pair of dots. But for our design purposes, we want to stay with pleasing arcs. And we've learned already that the EFE from more dots makes the interpretation of the line even better for us. When we're working on our designs, we're going to find that arcs are very, very important for us. The next line that we're going to learn about is the curve. And as we'll see, there's an awful lot to be learned about it, reminding us that a curve is a continuously bending line that is not an arc. We've already learned that dots make curves, and dots can make scroll backbone lines, and scroll backbone lines are curves. Our engraving designs can be almost totally curves. Before we get into curves, we need to introduce and learn a new term. That is, rate of change. Our knowing rate of change is very crucial to our design work. It will be used extensively, especially when we get into learning the principle of lines continue later in our series. If you want to get into mathematical calculus, you will be able to do many marvelous things with rate of change. But with its extensive equations and computations, we won't do that. We will, though, learn rate of change very simply. Let's see how it works for us in our designs with curves full of beauty and life. Obviously, there are 2 parts, rate and change. How do we use it in our designing? Change simply means a different position, course, or direction. We will use change in terms of a line changing course. Let's demonstrate. For simplicity, we will use an arc instead of a curve. Here is our arc that connects 2 points. In red is the course of our arc from point A to point B. Likewise, this is the course in red from point B to point A. Now we know change is what happens to the course of our line from one point to another point. Now let's learn rate. It can have many definitions. For our designing, we will use rate in relation to speed, and there are 3 possibilities. The first is speed remains constant. As we will see, it may be 0 or have a numerical value. The second is getting faster or accelerating. The third is getting slower or decelerating. So, combining both rate and change, we will use rate of change to mean how fast our line is changing its course as it moves along its path from one point to another point. We ask ourselves, is this black line changing course? We will answer this and look at this arc more closely in just a few minutes. There are 4 possibilities of rate of change. The first is none or 0. That is, there is no change in the course of the line from one point to another. The rate of change is 0. The second is that the rate of change is getting faster. It is accelerating. And thirdly, the rate of change is getting slower and decelerating. That is, as our line moves from point to point, it's changing more slowly. The 4th possibility is constant. It simply means that as our line is moving on its course from point to point, it does have a rate of change, but the rate of change always remains constant. Let's learn to use each of these 4 possibilities now. Our first possibility is that the rate of change is 0. A line that has no rate of change is a straight line, proceeding on its course from point to point without moving any other direction than continuing straight. To demonstrate the 0 rate of change, we have 2 points for the course of this line, and we have a straight line between them. As we follow our line's course from left to right, we see that it does not change course. We know that it has no rate of change. Our straight line will just continue forever on its constant course. Yes, a straight line with 0 rate of change is also a line with constant rate of change. We will learn constant rate of change in just a few minutes. The second possibility for rate of change is that the speed of its changing will be faster. Our line will be accelerating its change as it proceeds from point to point. The line that works with this acceleration possibility is our old friend, the curve. To learn how it works, let's look at 4 points. Let's compare the 2 sections of our curve, section A to B and section C to D. For our purposes, we will not make mathematical calculations on these segments to determine their rate of change. We'll just study them to learn what is happening with our curve along its course from point A to point D. Evaluating section A, B, we see that it is a flatter line than section C, D. Likewise, section C, D is more curved than section A, B. This tells us that A to B is changing less than C to D. This curve from A to D is nicely flowing on its course. We know that section AB is changing less than section CD. Therefore, our curve from point A to point D must be getting faster and accelerating in its rate of change. This is how accelerating rate of change works for us. Now let's study decelerating rate of change. It's exactly opposite of accelerating. It'll be a piece of cake for us to learn. Let's use our curve again and go from point D to point A as the course. We find our curve's course goes from a segment D to C of greater rate of change to a segment B to A of lesser rate of change. This verifies that our curve is decelerating in its rate of change on its course from point D to point A. The fourth possibility is that the rate of change is at a constant rate, but it is not zero. If it were zero, it would be a straight line, like we saw before. Here's an example of the other line that has a constant rate of change other than the straight line. The arc has a constant rate of change and is changing as it continues on its course from point to point, but the change is at a constant rate. If there is a constant rate of change, the line continues on the same course change from point to point. Let's learn more fully the answer to our question previously about the arc. Does our black line change course? Here is our line. To demonstrate, this is purposefully made an arc from this circle. As this line progresses around this circle and moves from point to point, its rate of change is constantly the same. Please don't forget that rate for us means speed. Our line with a constant rate of change will just keep going around and around and around. Our arc here is a great example of constant rate of change. The arc's rate of change is constant, but not zero. So, please always know that for our designing purposes, there are only two lines that have a constant rate of change. These are the straight line and the true arc. Both of these lines have constant rate of change, but they are different. The straight line has zero rate of change, whereas the arc will have some rate of change. The other type of line we have learned is the curve. We know how its rate of change accelerates, and we know how its course decelerates. Let's stress once again the importance of our knowing that all these principles about rate of change for straight lines, arcs, and curves will be crucial to our learning our series episode number 6, Lines Continue, coming up later. We will find that lines continue is invaluable to our success. We have learned that lines are just like everything else. Lines are energy, frequency, and vibration, EFV for short. Going back to our principles of straight lines, arcs, curves, and rate of change, let's bring back some of the action terminology that we used in describing our lines. In all, we use 28 different words for the action of our lines. All these words vividly express the EFV possessed by lines and that they emit to us. A few of these words are continues, becomes, can make, wants, works, connects, accelerating, decelerating, moves, goes, progresses. Each of these have EFV. If we will recognize our lines to have EFV and power and life, we will vastly open up the realm of pleasing, lifelike designs. After all, isn't that our goal? Now, let's learn a line that we will love to include as much as possible in all of our designs. It's the beauty line. The beauty line has the pleasing EFV reflective of its name. Beauty lines can be found throughout pleasant engravings and their designs. There are a great many beauty lines in this example. Some will be pointed out in red. Parts of some will be partially hidden due to overlapping structures for 3D effect. This is the largest one. Here's another large one. And here's two more. Also, a whole lot of smaller ones. Altogether, there's many in this design, and these are just a few of them. To learn the beauty line, we must point out that each end of the line is a little different from the other. One way to think about it is that the arc radius of one end is larger than the other end. And most obviously, the beauty line is a compound curve with each end curving in the opposite direction of the other. What makes it so beautiful and pleasing is the graceful transition from one to the other. We must not underestimate the importance of a graceful transition. A graceful transition is of paramount importance. It cannot be done haphazardly. It is possible to think of them being made from three sources. A beauty line can be made from two arcs. It can be made from two curves. And it can be made of a combination of one arc and one curve. In our designing and using beauty lines, we will draw them in freehand depending upon the situation. We already know arcs and curves. We will think of the beauty line being derived from arcs and curves. We will not need to draw in complete circles or curves to get our most pleasing beauty line. We just want to know that we can use their attributes. In this example, previously, we noted it was arc radius from which we made the beauty line. Let's know it completely now. Here we have two different size circles. We know for sure the radii are different. So, if we make a beauty line from these two circles, we get this. And we had to make a graceful and pleasing transition from one to the other. Let's learn how beauty lines will look different when the radii of the arcs change in size. Variation is caused by the difference in radii of our arcs. In this example, the radius of the top arc is shown as a percentage of the bottom arc. In number 1, the top is 98% of the bottom, and so on to 60% in the number 6. The two radii may be quite close in size, but not exact as in number 1. Or they may be quite different in size as in number 6. Let's look closely at how the EFV of the beauty line changes, such as going from figure 1 to figure 6. They have a differing feel. But be cautious. Your eye will tell you when their sizes have become too different and they become displeasing. Let's learn a second source of inspiration for our beauty line. We could use two curves together to form a beauty line. Here's a larger one, and this is a smaller one going in the opposite direction. Our next absolutely critical step is to make our graceful transition right here. So let's blend the two curves. Now we've learned how two curves could make a beauty line. The third way to think about how beauty lines could be made is from a curve and from an arc. Let's join them together. We know how important a graceful transition is. Let's make it. Here's our beauty line. A good way to evaluate our new beauty line is to look at it as a mirror image and flip it upside down. If it is still pleasing to us, then we did a good job. Interestingly, each of these three beauty lines we have made are pleasing, but have a different feel to us. They emit different EFV, but each can be used successfully in a pleasing design. Let's use each one in a leaf structure design. Do we see any other beauty lines in each leaf structure? Our entire objective in constructing a beauty line is that it is graceful and pleasing. Needless to say, it also must fit harmoniously into our overall design. Let's look at some beauty lines that have EFV that is not very graceful or pleasing, just so that we can get a comparative feeling. These are exaggerated for clarity. And amazingly, we can use a very pleasing beauty line in any size, at any angle, and flipped. We can flip it vertically, we can flip it horizontally, and rotate it. We can use it in an infinite number of poses. A graceful and pleasing beauty line is always willing to be placed wherever we need it. There you go. We've really got into knowing beauty lines in depth. And that's great. They will always be a vital part of our designs. We've now completed knowing lines in our Learning to See elementary school. Our following episode in Design Simplified is number 4, and it's harmony. Harmony is absolutely vital to our designing. It is very basic also, but totally essential to know and master. Thank you very much for watching and your great attention.